The Addams Family Chronicles continue. Chapter 36. Maximum Security. It is said that there's a black sheep in every family, and while most families tend to downplay this notion, individual members often spend time in their quietest moments pondering issues such as this. When the topic comes up in the course of casual family conversation at the dinner table, the black sheep is rarely identified as a member of the nuclear family unit. More often, talk centers on an eccentric aunt who was a prostitute, or perhaps a distant cousin who ended up marrying his stepmother. At the Addams family dinner table, the black sheep conversation revolved around Dad's good-looking, ne'er-do-well brother, Uncle Wade, who never made an honest dollar in his life and spent most of his adult life behind bars. He died all too young, less than a month after his release from prison. And because of his prolific career as a felon, the Addams children had very little contact with him. And as the years passed, they only knew their uncle through the stories relayed to them by Mom and Dad. Whether these accounts are fact or fable, myth or legend, truth or propaganda, only those who knew him best will judge. But this is the story they were told. Dad was probably closer to his parents than he was to any of his three siblings, Aunt Catherine, Uncle Wade, or Uncle Boyd. Certainly, he wasn't close to his older sister Catherine for whatever reason. He was only 12 when, at the tender age of 14, she ran off to marry a man a dozen years her senior. She would bear him 12 children, and as the years went by, her family and Dad's would only socialize once, at a funeral in Texarkana in 1971, when one of Aunt Catherine's oldest children died unexpectedly. And while Dad and his youngest brother, Uncle Boyd, would follow similar paths in education, the 10-year age difference between them led into separate social circles. And when they were older, Boyd married and moved far away. But Dad and Uncle Wade were less than 2 years apart. Both were the middle children, and they grew up in competition with one another, sharing many of the same interests and experiences. Merely by virtue of birth order and the culture that produced them, Dad and Uncle Wade found themselves on common ground. But the black sheep gene showed up early in Uncle Wade, and while Dad may have also inherited it, there was no doubt in whom the trait was fully expressed. Now, there's no telling exactly when Uncle Wade committed his first offense, but there was a story told by Dad of a time when he and Uncle Wade were young. Papa, their father, would often fire his shotgun to disperse the neighbors' cows whenever they would wander into his pasture and eat his hay. From such a great distance across a field, the buckshot failed to penetrate their hides, but the sting of the pellets would send them running back home across the fence boundary, and no harm was done. One day, when Papa was gone, Dad and Uncle Wade noticed that one of the neighbor's milk cows had wandered into the yard. They grabbed the shotgun, and though it's unclear which of them actually pulled the trigger, one of them blasted that cow's udder to smithereens. The bawling cow ran wildly from the yard, bleeding profusely from the fresh, cavernous wound that occupied her underside. The boys watched the cow all the way to the neighbor's house until they saw the owner of the cow looking on and realized he had witnessed the whole bloody affair. They ducked down quickly, hoping they had not been seen, before running back into the farmhouse. But when Papa got home, the neighbor arrived abruptly thereafter, and the two of them had words. The boys listened from inside the farmhouse. The neighbor threatened loudly that there'd be hell to pay if his cow died, and wondered why they'd shot his cow in the first place. Papa didn't say much, but when the talk was over, he burst into the farmhouse and beat them both badly. It could have been a learning experience for both of them. or it could have been the beginning of the journey toward the dark side. Uncle Wade's first clash with the law came when he was 16 or 17. He was caught stealing a saddle across the state line in Booneville, Arkansas. As a result, he went to juvenile detention and dropped out of high school as an 18-year-old sophomore in Cameron, Oklahoma, and a lifelong pattern of crime and punishment was established. He tried the straight life, moving to Michigan in the mid-1950s to work for General Motors. He even got Dad a job there. But after a summer of work, both were laid off, and while Uncle Wade moved to California to be closer to his parents, Dad and Mom stayed in Michigan and taught school. This rejection could have been the proverbial final straw in shaping his concept of an honest day's work. As a result, he recommitted himself to the confidence game, honed it, and became fairly proficient at it, due in large part to his clean, good looks and affable manner. Though she wouldn't say it, Mom never liked Uncle Wade, perhaps because she knew that he and Dad were trouble together. She viewed Wade as a threat to her and the children's future, and though she begrudgingly tolerated Dad's extramarital excursions, she knew that a prison sentence, by virtue of his association with his brother and his lawless behavior, would most certainly alter the family unit. Their relationship was never confrontational, but underneath, there was resentment, because she knew Uncle Wade had leverage and influence with his brother, influence she'd never, ever possess. Uncle Wade married in the late 50s and started a family, but that didn't last too long, nor did it protect him from the law's long arm. He moved often to stay one step ahead, but never strayed too far from his migrating parents, who had returned to Oklahoma in 1960. Dad, too, returned here in 1962 and bought 20 acres in Delaware County, a half-hour drive from Cherokee County, where his parents had settled. It is here that Uncle Wade would test the resolve of local law enforcement. Young Eric was 4 years old when he first met Uncle Wade. He had seen pictures of his handsome uncle, and he'd heard discussion of him at the dinner table. One Saturday morning, as they ate breakfast, the children listened as Mom and Dad spoke about Uncle Wade. They used words that were foreign to the children, like forgery and armed robbery, then something about a felony and Papa and Granny harboring him from the law. When Dad mentioned that he might go and see him that day, young Eric quickly brightened, hoping to be included. Mom bristled and put forth a bit of opposition to the trip, but capitulated meekly as the two got up and prepared for the drive over to Papa and Granny's farmhouse to see Uncle Wade. The two drove up the steep hill to the modest farmhouse, and the brakes on the white Chevrolet pickup squeaked as the vehicle came to a full stop. It was foggy, probably due to the microclimate of the cold, spring-fed creek that rippled past the property on the other side of the road. Dad got out, and young Eric followed, as the driver's side door slammed shut after them, echoing down the holler to the south of the property. Papa's dog, Queenie, appeared from somewhere behind the farmhouse, barking menacingly, but when Dad quickly offered her the back of his hand in introduction, the cacophony stopped, and her disposition mutated into tail-wagging, hand-licking acceptance. The sparse gravel crunched underfoot as they continued toward the front door screen where Papa was standing. With a smile that bordered on a chuckle, he opened the door for them to come in. "That goddamn bitch ain't worth nothing." Rarely did Papa utter a sentence without at least one curse word, and his brusque manner demanded that those in his path remain wary. He'd lived a hard life, looking much older than his 52 years. He retreated back to his vinyl recliner and sat down, a bit out of breath from the few steps it had taken to open the door. Granny sat on the couch next to Uncle Wade, and as Dad moved to the middle of the room, Uncle Wade smiled widely and raised his right hand, clutching a revolver, and unexpectedly, inexplicably, pointed it squarely at Dad. A nervous laugh from Dad followed as he raised his open palms toward Uncle Wade, reluctantly playing along with the cruel game that was underway. Young Eric's heart leapt straight through his shallow breath and into his throat, suddenly transfixed by these events as he perceived them. Uncle Wade laughed again at Dad's fear, and buoyed by the dominating feeling of power, pulled the hammer back and cocked the weapon. It was a scene plucked straight from a Western movie script. Uncle Wade became serious. So did Dad. Come on, Wade. Very funny. Now put the gun down. Dad's tone still held a bit of levity, but it was obvious that the joke had gone way beyond anything funny. Uncle Wade laughed again, still pointing the gun. Pawpaw finally interjected. Put that goddamn thing down before you kill someone. Pawpaw reached into his pocket and pulled out a plug of chewing tobacco and cut off a piece with the blade of his pocket knife before stuffing it deep into his right cheek. He looked up and scowled at Uncle Wade, who suddenly became submissive in the face of his father's uncompromising demand. Uncle Wade laughed as he lowered the gun and eased the hammer down onto the chamber. Shit, I was just kidding around. Can't you take a joke? How you doing, big brother? Ain't it good to see me? The two of them hugged without acknowledging young Eric at all, which was fine by him. He was still sorting out the unpredictable and confusing nature of the whole frightening episode. He said nothing for the remainder of the visit, but as he and Dad readied to leave, Uncle Wade looked down at him. Their eyes met only for a second, but in that brief moment of interaction, there was darkness. Eric quickly looked away as he shrunk timidly behind his father, then pulled anxiously at Dad in the direction of the front door, which elicited a diabolical laugh from Uncle Wade. And as they walked back toward the white Chevy pickup, crunching across the gravel, Queenie was close behind. Dad started the pickup, and they drove away, but the fear and danger that young Eric felt that day remained. Time passed, and Uncle Wade spent most of it incarcerated in Oklahoma or on the run out of state. Not even Dad knew his whereabouts. Papa and Granny moved out to California in 1968, this time for good. Uncle Wade soon followed, and it didn't take long before his criminal ways landed him in Folsom State Prison outside of Sacramento. Mom and Dad split up in 1974, and the next year, Dad made plans to take the kids on a vacation to visit Papa and Granny in California. It would be 2 weeks of driving in a 1961 Chevy Nova without air conditioning, but it was quality time for Dad and the three of his children, Keith, Eric, and Alicia. It had been over 5 years since the children had seen them, and along the way, they'd get to see the Grand Canyon, Death Valley, Yosemite, and Folsom State Prison, where Uncle Wade was incarcerated. And although it had been almost 10 years since young Eric had first met him at his papa's farmhouse in Cherokee County, the fear and panic of that memory fluttered like an albatross in his belly. Dad steered the car up to the perimeter guard station that sat just outside the outer fence of Folsom Prison, where they were stopped by a serious-looking, middle-aged, uniformed man holding a clipboard. He wore a brown tie that matched his trousers and complemented a beige shirt. Displayed was a name badge that read, California Department of Corrections. My name is Jesse Martinez. On his waist was a very large revolver tucked neatly into a leather holster that was anchored on a big black gun belt. 20 or 30 shiny bullets, each placed fastidiously into small, perfectly tailored leather loops, adorned the length of his belt. The uneasy children sat silently as Dad rolled down his window to greet the guard, awkwardly friendly in such a grim and austere environment. I'm the warden. Do you mind if we just drive in? Dad had a habit of joking at inappropriate times. This was one of them. The guard stopped momentarily without blinking, then lifted his clipboard before breaking his silence. Name, please, An expressionless deadpan occupied the guard's face, ignoring Dad's attempt at humor altogether. Dad suddenly became more serious in his response. The children watched anxiously. "Did I say Warden? I meant Warren. My name is Warren Adams. We are here to see Wade Adams. He's my brother." Jesse Martinez began scribbling on the clipboard. After a few seconds, he looked up and cast his eyes discerningly at the three children. "Are these three your children?" The guard bent over and surveyed the situation in the back seat of the Chevy Nova. The silent children sat obediently, looking as innocent as possible. Jesse started scribbling again on his clipboard as Dad answered. "Why, yes, they are. Don't they look like me? People say this one is a carbon copy of me." Dad reached over and put his hand on Eric's shoulder, who withdrew quickly, uncomfortable with the sudden amount of attention being focused on him. Jesse hinted a smile before he straightened up and signaled to someone inside the fence. The gate began to open. "Mr. Adams, please pull forward to parking lot A and park in any of the unnumbered parking spaces. You will exit your car and proceed down the white line on the sidewalk to cell block B. There you will be met at the entrance by another Department of Correction employee who will assist you through to the next checkpoint. Thank you and have a nice day." The guard uttered these instructions as if by rote memory. Dad pulled the car through the gate and drove to parking lot A, as instructed, and the family walked down the sidewalk to cell block B as a unit. A series of checkpoints and more questions followed, and each time a big door opened until finally the family found themselves in a large, well-lit room that resembled a diner. There were tables and chairs, most of them occupied by family members of those being held captive. Vending machines along the perimeter of the room offered snacks and drinks and cigarettes to those who were visiting. It was an informal place of fellowship, where the prisoners could socialize in normalcy with those they loved. For them, it was a few precious minutes, perhaps an hour, away from the constant isolation and torment of existence on the inside. Dad and the children sat down at one of the smaller tables and waited. These few moments fueled spontaneous reflection by young Eric, possibly in a subconscious effort to ease his heightened anxiety. He remembered a segment from an 8mm film his mother had taken of a family gathering from Christmas in 1958, when his brother Len was just a toddler. It was a seemingly festive occasion in California, exchanging gifts with Granny and Pawpaw, Uncle Wade, his wife Stella, and Dad's youngest brother Boyd. The film showed Pawpaw hugging Len and Keith, then Dad juggling an orange. Then the scene switched to a couch where Uncle Wade sat, smiling at the camera between Stella and Granny, who were both sipping hot eggnog from a coffee cup. Then Stella is seen offering Uncle Wade a taste from her cup of nog. He takes the cup to his lips, just as young Len enters the frame and climbs up into Uncle Wade's lap. After a taste, Wade gives the camera a nod of approval before taking a second sip, ignoring young Len in the process. It was obvious to Len that his Uncle Wade simply didn't notice him. His only recourse to gain his uncle's attention was to make his presence known with a playful nudge, followed by a second, more forceful thrust. It couldn't have been more ill-timed. Whether or not Len's actions caused eggnog to slosh out of the cup isn't apparent on the film, but Uncle Wade's reaction and his fury toward young Len was on full display. In a flash, his fun-loving smile morphed into an angry glare as he turned his attention away from the camera squarely toward young Len. He raised his open hand threateningly and simulated a slapping gesture that caused Len to draw back submissively. Uncle Wade then looks down at his shirt as he hands the cup back to Stella, and as he realizes that his shirt is soiled, slaps toward Len a second time, and Len recoils further. At that point, the camera cuts away abruptly to another scene later that evening of young Len opening his Christmas gift, paradoxically, of a holster with 2 toy guns. Perhaps this event helped shape young Eric's opinion of his Uncle Wade, an event that happened long before he was even born, experienced only on film. He was left to interpret what he had seen, asked to fill in the gaps with his own imagination. But the cruel images on that film served to deepen his angst as they waited for Uncle Wade to arrive. Now, it wasn't long before a burly guard led Uncle Wade into the room through a big steel door. Recognition was immediate, and Dad and Uncle Wade embraced heartily before sitting down again at the table to catch up on the last 5 to 10 years. He didn't say much to the kids, perhaps preferring not to waste any of his valuable time on niceties. His face was that of a man older than his 39 years, and his dark brown hair had a streak of gray that coursed through on the side from front to back. And though he was still a nice-looking man, there was a disquietude about him, an uneasiness in his manner that evoked suspicion and distrust. He pulled a pack of cigarettes out from his pocket, lit one, and then offered a smoke to Dad. Uncharacteristically, Dad accepted. He hadn't smoked a cigarette in several years. The children watched in silence as Uncle Wade dominated the conversation with ideas he had on how to get rich, if only he could make parole. Dad took a drag from his cigarette, but blew the smoke out quickly without inhaling, in a small rapid stream through a small hole in his puckered lips. Uncle Wade, by contrast, drew the thick smoke deeply into his lungs, never consciously exhaling the smoke at all, and as he continued talking, the smoke escaped in small bursts from his nose and mouth with every word he spoke. He paused just long enough to take another hurried drag from his cigarette before resuming his speech on how to make money on the down low. Then, midway through the next sentence, Uncle Wade suddenly stopped and locked into a dark stare with young Eric. It was a chillingly familiar moment that passed between them, and the look provoked terror by its unmistakably malevolent delivery. With every ounce of courage he possessed, Eric broke gaze just as Uncle Wade addressed him. "What are you looking at?" Uncle Wade deadpanned. He took a drag from his cigarette before continuing in a lowered tone, just above a whisper. "In here, they'd just soon kill you as look at you." He held a serious expression for a couple of seconds more before he burst into a raucous laugh, amused by Eric's perplexity, though he was laughing alone. The laughter, however, quickly devolved into a coughing fit that lasted twice as long, and as he recovered, his tone softened a bit. "Shit, I was just kidding around. Can't you take a joke?" Whether it was out of fear or submission, young Eric said nothing. In truth, he was probably still sorting out the unpredictable and confusing nature of the whole frightening episode. Dad said nothing about it, perhaps because he already knew how to best deal with Uncle Wade's idiosyncrasies. The two of them continued talking for the remainder of the visit, even up until the guard came to take Uncle Wade back to his cell. He glanced back at the family for a brief instant, just before the big steel door separated them forever. It's an image frozen in time, etched upon the neurons of the mind's eye, clearer than any photograph a camera could have ever captured. It would be the last time the children ever saw him, though they had no appetite for fostering their relationship. Papa died in 1978, and Dad moved out to California shortly after to marry a woman he'd met from placing a personal ad in a national magazine. He was once again close to his mother and Uncle Wade. During this time, Dad and Uncle Wade saw each other more frequently, on those short periods between his release from prison and his predictable recidivism. He stayed sporadically with Granny at her modest home outside of Modesto. It was here that Dad would often see him. Many times he'd confide in Dad and tell him of crimes he'd committed, divulging details and bragging how he had invented the perfect con and swindled some poor fool out of his money. His life had been wasted, no doubt, always opting to chase some get-rich-quick scheme rather than to earn money honestly. In many respects, he was the most dangerous type of criminal. having lost so often that he was no longer afraid of losing anything. And at this moment, he was a free man. In 1980, Uncle Wade was arrested for the murder in Fresno County of a Hispanic man who was found dead in the Fresno River. A long trial followed, but in the end he was acquitted. Afterward, he boasted to Dad of how he had drowned the man with his bare hands during an argument over a can of beans. Whether he was actually guilty or innocent of this crime, nobody knows. Certainly, Uncle Wade was given to exaggeration and falsification. Outside of his brother and his mother, he trusted very few. But of those in his inner circle, Dad probably harbored as many of his secrets as anyone. And now, ironically, these secrets have been long forgotten, erased by the cruel passage of time. Unfortunately, on Memorial Day weekend of 1982, Granny was killed. She was riding in the passenger seat with a friend when their car veered onto the shoulder of the freeway and struck a semi-trailer that was parked on the side of the road. Her friend had been drinking, but wasn't hurt at all. All four of her children attended the funeral, and it would be the last time they were all together. The death of his mother was especially difficult for Uncle Wade, and the stress of her passing may well have been the final blow. The pain of her absence led him to binge drink, which precipitated a heart attack. After a day or two at the local hospital, he checked himself out against medical advice, and less than a month later, Uncle Wade was gone too. He was 46 years old. The police said they found him sitting at the dinner table, face down in a bowl of soup. When Dad arrived to view his body, his face still wore that same angry, rebellious expression that so defined his life. Even in death, he could not escape the torment that possessed the deepest reaches of his soul. Uncle Wade was cremated, and only a handful of people attended his memorial. To this day, his ashes remain unclaimed at a cemetery in Houston, California, the same cemetery where his parents are buried. His life was a contradiction in that he spent so much of his energy and time in pursuit of that next get-rich scheme, yet he died a pauper. He left behind so many mysteries, only a few answers, and several casualties in his wake. But only God knows his secrets now.